People rarely announce what they really want. They tell you what they want you to believe they want. Sometimes the difference is harmless. A friend says they are checking on you, but what they really want is reassurance. Someone offers advice, but underneath the advice is a desire to feel important. A person asks for your opinion while secretly hoping you will confirm the decision they have already made. And sometimes the difference matters much more. Someone may appear generous while quietly creating a debt you are expected to repay. Someone may seem concerned while actually trying to control your choices. Someone may ask an innocent question because they genuinely care, or because they are collecting information they intend to use later. The difficult part is that intentions are invisible. You cannot simply look at someone's face and know what is happening inside their mind. But human behavior leaves patterns. Intentions often appear in timing, repetition, emotional reactions, incentives, and what changes when someone gets what they want. The mistake is thinking that decoding people means becoming suspicious of everyone. It doesn't. It means becoming more observant without becoming paranoid. Because the goal is not to assume the worst about people. The goal is to stop assuming the best without evidence. Once you understand the difference, ordinary conversations begin to look different. A compliment becomes something to observe. A favor becomes something to understand. A question becomes something to examine. And slowly, you begin to notice something fascinating. People often reveal their intentions without realizing they are revealing them. Introduction. Every day, you interact with people whose intentions you cannot directly see. A coworker asks whether you are free this weekend. A friend suddenly becomes unusually interested in your plans. Someone gives you advice you never asked for. A relative keeps offering help. A stranger becomes extremely friendly. A person who usually ignores you suddenly wants your attention. What do these behaviors mean? Most of us answer that question too quickly. We judge behavior by the surface. If someone smiles, we assume friendliness. If someone helps us, we assume generosity. If someone asks questions, we assume curiosity. If someone disagrees with us, we assume hostility. But behavior is rarely that simple. The same action can come from completely different intentions. A person can give you advice because they care about you. They can give you advice because they want control. They can give you advice because they want to feel intelligent. Or they can give you advice because helping someone makes them feel useful. The behavior looks almost identical. The motive underneath it is completely different. This is why reading intentions requires more than reading body language. It requires context. It requires understanding incentives. It requires noticing patterns instead of isolated moments. And most importantly, it requires learning how people behave when circumstances change. Imagine someone who is incredibly supportive whenever you agree with them, but becomes cold whenever you make an independent decision. The important clue is not that they were supportive. The important clue is what happened when they lost influence. Or imagine someone who repeatedly asks about your problems, listens carefully, and appears deeply concerned. But somehow every conversation eventually turns into a discussion about them. The question is not whether they care. The question is what role your problems are playing in the relationship. Are they listening because they want to understand you? Or because your vulnerability gives them attention, information, emotional importance, or leverage? These questions can feel uncomfortable. But discomfort is not the same thing as cynicism. You can understand human motives without assuming that everyone is manipulating you. In fact, one of the most important principles of decoding people is uncertainty. You should rarely say, "I know exactly why they did that." A healthier question is, what are the possible reasons, and which explanation best fits the pattern? That small change protects you from two opposite mistakes. The first is being naive. You assume every action is innocent, even when repeated evidence suggests otherwise. The second is becoming paranoid. You interpret every action as manipulation, even when ordinary explanations make more sense. Neither approach is intelligent. Real social intelligence lives somewhere between trust and suspicion. It is the ability to remain open while still paying attention. Throughout this audiobook, we are going to examine the hidden patterns behind human intentions. We will look at why people sometimes disguise what they want, why their reactions to boundaries reveal so much, why favors can create invisible expectations, why attention can sometimes be transactional, why people ask questions that appear harmless, and why the most revealing moment often comes after they receive the thing they wanted. But there is one principle we need before everything else. Never decode a person from a single behavior. One strange message means very little. One defensive reaction means very little. One unusually generous gesture means very little. But when the same pattern appears repeatedly, across different situations, with the same outcome, the behavior becomes much more informative. People can perform an action. They have a much harder time consistently performing an entire pattern. And that is where hidden intentions begin to become visible. Chapter 1. The Pattern Ben. Chapter 1. The Pattern Beneath the Behavior. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to understand others is focusing on individual moments. Someone cancels plans. Someone becomes defensive. Someone gives you an expensive gift. Someone suddenly becomes distant. We immediately search for an explanation. But a single behavior is usually weak evidence. Human beings are inconsistent. People have bad days. They become stressed. They misunderstand messages. They forget things. They react emotionally and later regret it. If you try to discover someone's intention from one moment, you are likely to mistake noise for information. Patterns are different. Imagine a coworker who asks you for help once. That means almost nothing. Now imagine they repeatedly contact you when they have difficult work, disappear when you need assistance, become unusually warm when they need something, and return to distance immediately after receiving help. Now you are no longer looking at one behavior. You are looking at a pattern. And patterns answer a different question. Not what did they do, but when do they do it? This is one of the most useful questions you can ask when trying to understand hidden intentions. When does their behavior change? When do they become warmer? When do they become colder? What happens immediately before their behavior changes? What happens afterward? Suppose someone becomes incredibly friendly every time an important decision is approaching. Perhaps they suddenly compliment you. They ask about your plans. They offer help. They remind you how much they value your friendship. Then, once the decision goes their way, their behavior returns to normal. The friendliness may have been genuine. But the timing gives you something important to examine. Intentions often hide inside timing. Think about persuasion. A person asking for a favor does not randomly become unusually complimentary immediately beforehand. Timing does not prove motive. But timing gives motive a context. Human behavior becomes easier to understand when you stop looking at isolated dots and start looking for the line connecting them. People can say they value honesty, but do they appreciate honesty when it makes them uncomfortable? Someone can say they respect independence, but how do they react when you make a decision without asking for their approval? Someone can say they want you to succeed, but what happens when your success changes the balance between you? This is where intentions often become visible. Words describe the identity people want to present. Patterns reveal what that identity costs them. A person may sincerely believe they are supportive. But if their support disappears whenever you disagree, there may be a hidden condition attached to it. A person may sincerely believe they are generous. But if every favor becomes a future argument, the generosity may function more like an investment. Human beings are often unaware of their own motives. Someone can manipulate without thinking, I am going to manipulate this person. They may simply have learned that certain behaviors produce certain outcomes. This is why decoding intentions is not the same as exposing villains. People pursue emotional rewards as well as practical ones. Attention, approval, control, security, status, belonging, reassurance, and importance can all influence behavior. Sometimes a person is not trying to gain something tangible from you. They may simply want to feel needed. This explains why some people repeatedly create situations where others depend on them. They may genuinely believe they are helping. But underneath the helping can be an emotional reward. I matter because you need me. Once you understand this, certain relationships become easier to interpret. You stop asking only, what are they doing for me? You start asking, what does this interaction give them? That question can reveal motives without requiring mind reading. Suppose someone constantly gives you advice. Perhaps they enjoy helping. Perhaps they enjoy being the expert. Perhaps your dependence makes them feel important. Perhaps they are simply anxious and believe they can prevent problems by controlling outcomes. Several motives can produce the same behavior. So the goal is not to choose the darkest explanation. The goal is to identify the explanation that best fits the repeated pattern. There is a useful test for this. Change the conditions. If the behavior changes dramatically when the reward changes, pay attention. If someone is kind only when they need something, that is information. If someone respects your boundaries only when there is nothing to lose, that is information. If someone supports your success only when it does not threaten their position, that is information. And if someone remains consistent when there is nothing obvious to gain, that is information too. Consistency is one of the strongest signals available to you. Anyone can behave well when everything is going their way. The more revealing question is what happens when they do not get what they want. That takes us to one of the most powerful clues in human behavior, the boundary. Chapter 2. The moment you say no. You can learn more about some relationships from one simple word than from months of conversation. No. Most people pay attention to how someone treats them when they agree. But agreement does not reveal very much. If you give someone what they want, there is little reason for them to become difficult. The revealing moment comes when you refuse. You say no to the request. You disagree with the opinion. You choose something different. You decline the invitation. You stop providing a resource they have become accustomed to receiving. Suddenly, the emotional temperature changes. This is where boundaries become psychological information. Imagine a friend asks you to do a favor. You agree. They are grateful. A few weeks later, they ask again. You agree again. Then another request appears. This time, you say, I can't. Their response tells you something. Maybe they understand immediately. Of course. No problem. Maybe they are disappointed but respectful. That is normal. Or perhaps they become cold. They remind you of everything they have done for you. They accuse you of changing. They make you feel guilty. They suddenly question whether you really care about them. The important thing is not that they were disappointed. Disappointment is human. The important thing is whether your boundary is treated as legitimate. A person can dislike your boundary and still respect it. Healthy relationships do not require everyone to be happy with every decision. They require people to tolerate each other's autonomy. If someone only treats you well when you are useful, compliant, available, or agreeable, then the relationship may contain an invisible condition. You are not simply being valued. You may be being valued for what you provide. Again, this does not automatically make the other person malicious. People can become accustomed to receiving something without consciously realizing how dependent they have become on it. A parent can become controlling because they are afraid. A friend can become demanding because they fear losing closeness. A partner can become possessive because uncertainty feels threatening. The behavior may still be unhealthy even when the intention is not consciously harmful. This is why we must separate intention from impact. Someone can intend to protect you while making you feel controlled. Someone can intend to help while making you dependent. Someone can intend to be close while ignoring your boundaries. Understanding the motive does not require excusing the behavior. There is another interesting boundary test. Watch what happens when you become less predictable. If someone is comfortable with you only when they know exactly what you will do, your independence may feel threatening to them. You choose a different career. You spend time with different friends. You develop an opinion they did not expect. You stop explaining every decision. Suddenly, they want more information. Why didn't you tell me? Who influenced you? Why are you acting differently? Sometimes those questions are genuine. Sometimes they are attempts to restore a sense of control. The difference is often visible in what happens after you answer. If they listen and accept your explanation, there may be no problem. If every explanation creates another demand for justification, the conversation is no longer simply about understanding you. It may be about controlling the decision. Curiosity wants information. Control wants compliance. The two can look identical at first. Both ask questions. Both seek explanations. But their end goals are different. Imagine someone asks, "Why are you going there?" Curiosity is satisfied by understanding. Control is satisfied only when your decision changes. That is why the outcome of an interaction can tell you more than the words used during it. Ask yourself, what would satisfy this person? If understanding is enough, they may simply want information. If only obedience satisfies them, something deeper may be happening. You do not need to provoke people or manipulate them. Simply maintain reasonable boundaries. Say no when you mean no. Disagree respectfully when you disagree. Keep some decisions private. And observe. A person's reaction to your autonomy is often more revealing than their behavior when you are giving them exactly what they want. Because when you say yes, they receive the outcome they prefer. When you say no, their real relationship with your independence becomes visible. Chapter 3. The Invisible Debt. Some obligations are written down. Others are never spoken. Yet you can feel them. Someone does you a favor. You thank them. They smile and say, "Don't worry about it." Months later, you decline a request. And suddenly, the old favor appears. "I helped you when you needed me." The debt existed even though you were never told about it. This is one of the most interesting forms of hidden intention because the person may not even think of themselves as manipulative. Human relationships naturally involve reciprocity. If someone helps us, we often want to help them back. That is not inherently unhealthy. The problem begins when generosity becomes a hidden contract. A person gives something freely on the surface but expects control over your future choices. The gift is not really a gift. It is leverage disguised as generosity. You can often recognize this through the emotional accounting that appears later. I did this for you. After everything I've done. You wouldn't be in this position without me. I was there when nobody else was. These statements can be understandable expressions of hurt. But repeated use of past favors to control present decisions reveals something important. The person may not have been giving. They may have been investing. And investments come with expectations. This does not mean you should become suspicious of every favor. Instead, watch for asymmetry. Does the person help freely? Or does their generosity consistently create pressure? Can you decline their requests later without punishment? Do they keep score? Imagine two friends. The first friend helps you move house. Later, you cannot help them because you are unavailable. They say, "No worries. I understand." The second friend helps you move house and later expects you to cancel an important commitment for them. When you hesitate, they remind you of the moving day. The action was similar. The psychological meaning was different. The first favor created connection. The second created leverage. There is another form of invisible debt that is even harder to notice, emotional debt. Someone listens to you for hours. They comfort you. They become your emotional support. Over time, they may begin to feel entitled to your attention. If you become busy, they interpret it as betrayal. I am always there for you. But being supportive does not automatically purchase unlimited access to another person's time. Healthy generosity leaves room for freedom. Manipulative generosity gradually reduces it. One of the best ways to understand this is to watch what happens when repayment is impossible. Suppose you cannot return the favor. Do they remain warm? Or does their attitude change? A person who genuinely wanted to help may be disappointed but still understand. A person who expected an emotional return may become resentful. This is why gratitude and obligation must be separated. You can appreciate what someone has done without surrendering your autonomy. You can be grateful without becoming permanently indebted. Mixed motives are normal. The mature question is not, do they have an ulterior motive? Almost everyone has multiple motives. The better question is, what happens when their desired outcome conflicts with my freedom? That question takes us deeper into the psychology of attention. Chapter 4. When attention becomes a transaction. Attention feels like connection. But attention is not always connection. Sometimes attention is a currency. People exchange it for reassurance, status, affection, validation, influence, or emotional security. Think about the person who constantly needs to know where they stand with you. Are you upset with me? Do you still like me? Why didn't you reply? Are we okay? At first, these questions can look like vulnerability. And sometimes they are. But if reassurance never lasts, something else may be happening. You reassure them. They feel better. A few hours later, the uncertainty returns. You reassure them again. The cycle repeats. The person may not consciously be manipulating you. They may simply have learned that your attention temporarily regulates their emotions. Your response becomes their emotional medicine. The problem is that you can eventually feel responsible for maintaining their emotional stability. This is where attention becomes transactional. They give you distress. You give them reassurance. The exchange may never be spoken aloud. But the pattern exists. There are other forms of attention transactions. Consider someone who constantly tells you dramatic stories. Every conversation becomes an emergency. Every problem requires your immediate involvement. Sometimes the person genuinely has difficult circumstances. But sometimes drama becomes a reliable way of maintaining connection. The deeper need may not be the crisis itself. It may be the attention produced by the crisis. This is why one useful question is, what happens when I stop reacting? If the behavior disappears because the person feels secure, that may tell you one thing. If the behavior escalates because your attention has decreased, that tells you something else. Attention can also be used as a reward. Someone becomes warm when you behave the way they prefer. They become distant when you do not. Warmth becomes the reward. Distance becomes the punishment. Over time, You begin adjusting yourself to avoid losing their attention. You stop disagreeing. You choose your words carefully. You avoid certain topics. You become available even when you do not want to be. Eventually, you may no longer be responding to what you actually want. You are responding to the emotional consequences of losing someone's approval. Real connection allows two people to remain separate individuals. Transactional attention often demands behavioral conformity. The person does not simply want closeness. They want a specific version of you. This is especially powerful when attention is inconsistent. If someone is always kind, their kindness becomes predictable. If someone is kind sometimes and cold at other times, you may become more focused on earning the kindness back. Uncertainty can intensify attention. You begin asking yourself what you did wrong. You monitor their mood. You analyze messages. You try harder. The relationship starts consuming mental energy. This does not mean every inconsistent person is deliberately using you. People can be inconsistent because they are stressed, distracted, emotionally overwhelmed, or uncertain themselves. But repeated patterns deserve attention. Especially when the pattern consistently rewards compliance and punishes independence. Watch how someone responds when you give your attention to something else. Your work. Your friends. Your hobbies. Your family. Your personal goals. If someone repeatedly tries to make you feel guilty for having a life outside them, their desire may not simply be connection. They may want priority. And priority is different from intimacy. This is why hidden intentions can be so difficult to recognize. Care can sometimes contain control. Love can sometimes contain possession. Concern can sometimes contain anxiety. Support can sometimes contain dependency. The word itself does not tell you the motive. The pattern does. Ask instead, what behavior are they trying to produce in me? If someone's concern consistently makes you change your choices, perhaps the real objective is influence. If someone's sadness consistently makes you cancel your boundaries, perhaps the real objective is access. If someone's affection disappears whenever you disagree, perhaps the real objective is compliance. Once you start watching the behavior they are trying to create, hidden intentions become much easier to understand. Chapter 5. The questions that aren't really questions. Questions feel harmless. Someone asks where you are going, who you are meeting, how much something cost, what you think about someone, whether you are happy with your job, what your plans are. Most of the time, these are ordinary forms of conversation. But questions can also be tools. The important clue is not simply what someone asks. It is what they do with the answer. Imagine a coworker asks about your career plans. They may genuinely care. Or perhaps they are trying to determine whether you are planning to leave. A friend asks whether you are seeing someone. Maybe they are curious. Maybe they are interested in you romantically. Maybe they are comparing themselves to you. Maybe they want information about someone else. The question alone cannot tell you. Context can. This is why decoding questions requires looking at sequence. What did they ask first? What did they ask next? What information seemed especially important? What changed after you answered? Imagine someone casually asking, "Are you still working from home?" Then, "What days are you usually there?" Then, "Does your partner work from home too?" Each individual question may sound harmless. Together, they form a pattern. The information being gathered becomes more specific. This does not automatically mean malicious intent. They could be planning a visit. They could be making conversation. They could simply be curious. But the pattern tells you that the person wants more information than the first question revealed. Another useful clue is emotional reaction. What happens when you do not answer? A genuinely curious person may accept, "I'd rather not say." Someone seeking control may continue, "Why not? What's the big deal? You're acting suspicious." Now the interaction has changed. The issue is no longer the information. It is your right to withhold it. Privacy itself is a boundary. There is also a fascinating pattern involving questions that contain assumptions. Why are you always so defensive? Who convinced you to do that? Why don't you trust me? These may sound like questions, but they already contain a conclusion. The person is not necessarily seeking information. They may be framing the situation. A question like, "Why don't you trust me?" can pressure you into defending your trust rather than discussing the behavior that caused concern. A question like, "Who put that idea in your head?" shifts responsibility away from your independent judgment. This is why you should sometimes listen to the assumption hidden inside the question. What does the question require you to accept before you can answer it? that can be more revealing than the question itself. There is another form of questioning, the test question. Someone asks something small to measure your reaction. Would you ever date someone like that? Would you tell me if you were upset? What would you do if I stopped talking to you? Do you think I'm important to you? Sometimes these are playful. Sometimes they are emotional experiments. The person is trying to discover where they stand. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong with wanting reassurance. But repeated testing can become exhausting. You may find yourself constantly proving your loyalty, attraction, friendship, or commitment. The person is not asking because they want information. They are asking because they want emotional certainty. And certainty may never arrive. One test leads to another. Healthy curiosity tends to converge. You answer, and the person understands. Anxiety-driven or controlling questioning may expand. You answer, but the answer creates another demand. Pay attention to whether information changes someone's behavior. If you tell someone you are uncomfortable with something and they adjust, they have processed the information. If you explain yourself repeatedly and they continue acting as though you never spoke, the questions may have been performative. They wanted the appearance of dialogue rather than the substance of it. And sometimes people reveal their intentions by asking for information they themselves would never willingly provide. They demand transparency while remaining secretive. They want to know your plans while protecting their own. They ask about your relationships while becoming defensive about theirs. They demand honesty while punishing you when honesty is inconvenient. That imbalance is worth noticing. Repeated one-way transparency can reveal an underlying power dynamic. One person knows. The other person reveals. One person evaluates. The other person is evaluated. And once you notice that dynamic, you can begin asking a deeper question. Who benefits from knowing? Chapter 6. Watch what happens after they get what they want. There is a moment in almost every interaction that people overlook, the moment after the desired outcome has been achieved. Before the favor, someone may be attentive. Before the agreement, they may be warm. Before the commitment, someone may communicate constantly. Then the outcome happens. And suddenly, something changes. The messages become less frequent. The attention disappears. The urgency vanishes. The warmth becomes ordinary. This does not automatically prove that the previous behavior was fake. People naturally relax after uncertainty ends. But the transition can still tell you something. Watch what remains when the incentive disappears. Imagine someone who repeatedly contacts you when they need professional help. They ask how you are. They praise your abilities. They seem interested in your life. You help them. A week later, they disappear. Months later, they return with another request. This is a very different pattern from someone who asks for help but continues the relationship afterward. The difference is not whether they ever needed something. Everyone needs things. The difference is whether the relationship survives when the need is gone. Transactions end when the exchange ends. Relationships continue. Again, there are exceptions. Someone may disappear because they are busy or because they assume you need space. One instance tells you little. Repeated cycles tell you more. This principle also applies to compliments. Suppose someone becomes extremely flattering before asking for something. The compliment itself is not suspicious. But if the warmth repeatedly appears before requests and disappears afterward, the timing becomes meaningful. The attention may not necessarily be fake. It may simply be conditional. It exists because a particular outcome is currently valuable. Conditional relationships are not always bad. A professional relationship is naturally conditional. A customer receives attention because they are a customer. A manager invests attention because an employee's performance matters. The problem arises when someone presents a conditional relationship as unconditional. They make you believe you are valued for who you are when the real pattern suggests you are primarily valued for what you provide. This distinction can be painful, especially when you want to believe the relationship is deeper than it is. But clarity is often kinder than confusion. There is another revealing moment. Watch what happens after you succeed. Some people are incredibly supportive while you are struggling. They comfort you. They encourage you. They tell you how proud they are. Then you succeed. You receive the promotion. You become more confident. You become independent. And suddenly, the relationship changes. Sometimes this happens because your success changes the person's sense of security. Your growth may make them feel left behind. Their reaction does not necessarily mean they never cared. It may mean their care was mixed with comparison. Human motives can coexist. A person can love you and envy you. They can admire you and feel threatened by you. They can support you and still want to remain ahead of you. This is why binary thinking fails. People are rarely purely generous or purely selfish. Their behavior emerges from competing motives. One of the most useful questions is, what happens when my success removes their advantage? If they celebrate you even when your growth gives them nothing, that is meaningful. If they become distant only when you become less dependent, that is meaningful too. Before the outcome, people are motivated by anticipation. After the outcome, they have less reason to perform. And when performance becomes unnecessary, behavior may become more natural. Temporary behavior is often a reaction. Sustained behavior is more informative. That is why consistency matters so much. Chapter 7. The deepest clue, what they need to feel. We often ask what people want. But there is a deeper question. What do they need to feel? This question can explain behavior that otherwise seems contradictory. Someone may want control because control makes them feel safe. Someone may want admiration because admiration makes them feel valuable. Someone may seek constant reassurance because reassurance makes them feel secure. Someone may dominate conversations because being heard makes them feel important. Someone may avoid conflict because peace makes them feel safe. Someone may constantly help others because being needed gives them a sense of identity. Once you understand the emotional need underneath behavior, people become easier to interpret. Not because you can suddenly read minds, but because behavior begins to make psychological sense. Imagine a person who becomes controlling whenever plans are uncertain. At first, you might think, they just want things their way. But perhaps uncertainty makes them anxious. Control becomes their way of reducing that anxiety. Now imagine someone who constantly seeks praise. You might think they are arrogant. But perhaps praise temporarily protects them from feeling inadequate. The behavior is still real. The need underneath it simply adds another layer. This distinction is powerful because it prevents shallow judgments. Instead of asking, why are they acting like this? Ask, what emotional state might this behavior help them achieve? That question opens possibilities. A person who constantly interrupts may be trying to establish status. A person who always agrees may be trying to preserve belonging. A person who exaggerates stories may be trying to feel significant. A person who refuses help may be protecting independence. A person who repeatedly creates conflict may be accustomed to intensity and interpret calm as emotional distance. None of these explanations should be treated as certainty. They are hypotheses. And the best hypotheses are tested through patterns. What happens when the emotional need is satisfied? Does the behavior stop? What happens when the need is threatened? Does the behavior intensify? This gives us a powerful framework for decoding hidden intentions. Look for the trigger. Look for the behavior. Look for the reward. And look for the reaction when the reward disappears. Imagine someone becomes unusually friendly when you praise them. The trigger is approval. The behavior is increased warmth. The reward is admiration. Now remove the admiration. What happens? If they remain equally warm, perhaps the connection is genuine. If their behavior becomes noticeably colder, approval may have been an important condition. This framework also helps explain people who seem impossible to understand. Consider someone who repeatedly pushes your boundaries. You say no. They ask again. You explain. They negotiate. You become firm. They become emotional. You finally agree. What was the reward? Your compliance. What did their behavior accomplish? It changed your decision. That does not tell you whether they consciously intended to manipulate you. But it tells you something about the function of the behavior. Behavior has consequences. And sometimes those consequences reveal what the behavior is designed, or unconsciously shaped, to achieve. This is one of the most important ideas in understanding people. Do not focus only on personality labels. Focus on functions. Instead of saying, this person is controlling, ask, what does controlling behavior accomplish for them? Instead of saying, this person is needy, ask, what does repeated reassurance provide them? Instead of saying, this person is selfish, ask, what reward are they consistently protecting? This shift makes your understanding more precise. It also makes you less judgmental. Because when you see the need beneath the behavior, you can sometimes respond differently. Suppose someone becomes defensive whenever you criticize their work. You could attack the defensiveness. Or you could recognize that their self-worth may be connected to competence. That does not mean avoiding honest feedback. It means delivering the feedback in a way that does not unnecessarily threaten their identity. Understanding intention can improve communication. It can also protect you. Suppose someone repeatedly needs you to feel guilty before they receive cooperation. You may understand that guilt gives them influence. Once you recognize the pattern, you no longer have to participate in it. You can acknowledge their feelings without surrendering your decision. This is where decoding people becomes useful. The goal is not to win against them. The goal is to stop being confused by patterns that once controlled your reactions. There is another important principle. The strongest evidence often comes from behavior that costs someone something. Anyone can be kind when kindness is convenient. Anyone can support you when supporting you costs nothing. Anyone can respect your independence when your decision benefits them. But what happens when doing the right thing costs them? That is where character and intention become more visible. Someone who respects your boundary despite disappointment is giving up control. Someone who celebrates your success despite personal comparison is giving up status. Someone who tells you the truth even when dishonesty would benefit them is giving up an advantage. Someone who helps without keeping score is giving up leverage. Costs reveal priorities. This is why observing sacrifice can be more informative than observing generosity. Generosity can sometimes be rewarding. Sacrifice often reveals what someone values when rewards conflict. Now think about your own behavior. This framework does not only apply to other people. You also have hidden intentions. You may tell yourself you are avoiding an argument because you want peace. But perhaps you are afraid of rejection. You may tell yourself you are helping someone because you care. But perhaps being needed makes you feel valuable. You may tell yourself you are giving advice because you want to help. But perhaps being right makes you feel secure. This is uncomfortable. But it is also freeing. Understanding hidden intentions is not about becoming better at judging other people. It is about becoming harder to deceive, including by yourself. Because self-deception is often the most convincing deception of all. We create explanations that protect our identity. We say, I am just being honest. I am only trying to help. I am asking because I care. Sometimes those things are true. Sometimes they are partially true. And sometimes they are emotionally convenient stories covering another motive. The mature person learns to hold both possibilities. I may genuinely care about this person, and I may also want something from them. I may want to help, and I may also enjoy being needed. I may want honesty, and I may also want confirmation. Mixed motives are not evidence of bad character. They are evidence of being human. The real question is whether we are willing to recognize them. And this gives us the final framework for decoding anyone. Do not look for one secret gesture. Look for patterns. Do not ask only what someone says. Ask what their behavior repeatedly produces. Do not focus only on what they want. Ask what emotional need the outcome satisfies. Do not watch only how they behave when things go well. Watch what happens when they hear no. Do not observe only the beginning of an interaction. Watch what happens after they get what they wanted. And never confuse a hypothesis with certainty. You are not reading minds. You are interpreting evidence. That difference keeps you intelligent. It keeps you compassionate. And it keeps you grounded. The purpose of understanding people is not to become suspicious of everyone. It is to become less easily confused. You can trust without being blind. You can be kind without being controllable. You can understand someone's insecurity without allowing it to control you. You can recognize someone's needs without becoming responsible for satisfying all of them. And perhaps most importantly, you can stop demanding that people's words explain everything. Sometimes their patterns already have. You do not need to become an expert at reading minds. You do not need to analyze every gesture. You do not need to assume that everyone has a hidden agenda. Human beings are too complicated for that. What you can learn is something more useful. You can learn to notice patterns. You can notice what changes when someone wants something. You can notice what happens when you say no. You can notice whether generosity creates freedom or obligation. You can notice whether attention continues after the reward disappears. You can notice what questions people repeatedly ask, and what they do with the answers. And you can notice the emotional needs that seem to sit underneath repeated behavior. None of these observations gives you absolute certainty. They give you context. And context is often what we are missing when we misunderstand people. A person is not one action. They are a pattern unfolding across time. So the next time someone's behavior confuses you, resist the urge to immediately label them. Pause. Look again. Ask what happened before the behavior. Ask what happened afterward. Ask what changed when you stopped giving them what they wanted. And ask what emotional reward the behavior might be providing. Sometimes you will discover that the person meant exactly what they said. Sometimes you will discover a motive they were never aware of. And sometimes you will realize that the relationship was built around a condition you had never noticed. The goal is not suspicion. The goal is clarity. Because once you understand that people can have mixed motives, you stop expecting human behavior to fit simple categories. You can see kindness and self-interest existing together. You can see love and insecurity existing together. You can see generosity and the desire to feel needed existing together. You can see fear hiding behind control. You can see uncertainty hiding behind confidence. And you can see your own motives with greater honesty. That may be the most valuable part of learning to decode anyone. Eventually, you stop asking only, what are they hiding from me? And you begin asking, what is this behavior trying to accomplish? That question changes the way you observe people. It makes you slower to judge, but faster to notice patterns. It allows you to remain compassionate without becoming naive. And perhaps that is what real social intelligence looks like. Not seeing secrets everywhere. Seeing clearly when the pattern is there. The deepest intentions are rarely hidden behind one dramatic moment. They are written quietly in repetition, reaction, timing, and choice. People reveal themselves. Usually not all at once. But often, little by little. And the more carefully you learn to watch, the less you need people to explain themselves. Because sometimes the pattern has already told you what words could not.